to Dr. Will's History Road Trip. I'm your host, Dr. Will, and for my first episode, I decided to travel from my home in South Texas to Gainesville, a small town in Cook County, Texas, near the Red River. My route took me through Goliad, site of an 1836 massacre at a Presidio and a Spanish mission, through Dallas, through Denton, the home of the University of North Texas, where I earned a master's degree and PhD in history. I reached out to my friend and mentor, Dr. Rick McCaslin, history professor at UNT. Dr. McCaslin is the author of Tainted Breeze, a book about the largest mass hanging in U.S. history, which took place in Gainesville in October of 1862 during the Civil War. Citizens of Gainesville became convinced that there was a Unionist plot to attack this area and return its loyalty to the United States. This plot was called the Peace Party. A vigilante court called the Citizens Court was hastily convened, and those suspected of trying to overthrow the Confederate government were arrested and held in custody awaiting trial. Overall, 41 men were killed in 2 sets of hangings, and some were shot while trying to escape. Dr. McCaslin and I went to Gainesville, where he explained the Great Hanging and showed where some of these events took place. So without further ado, let's join Dr. McCaslin and get this show on the road. So why were these men being hanged? What was their crime?
They were accused of being members of the Peace Party conspiracy. Now, what had happened is that the Confederacy had passed laws for a draft, for new taxes, for what they called impressment, which is they will pay you for goods, but they have the right to come and take those goods to sustain the war effort. All of this generated a lot of unhappiness among people up here who were not very wealthy. They lived on the frontier. They would rather stay home and tend their farms and protect their families from Indians, Comanches particularly, who came through here about every full moon. And so the Peace Party conspiracy, people ask me, was it real? I think there was some in it. I think there was absolutely. But there was a lot more just straight out draft dodging, resisting taxes, refusing to have your stuff taken, all of which made these men very suspect and made Confederate authorities then believe that Peace Party conspiracy might be something more dangerous. Now, let's add this in. Were there dangerous men in the party? During the testimony up there, it became clear that some few men, probably about 7 or 8, maybe 10, did have grand designs of helping the Union Army come in here and made alcohol-fueled boasts at local bars that probably got a lot of their friends who had less violent intentions into a lot of trouble.
Right. So what was it about this particular area that would have made this mass panic or fear made people so susceptible to that?
Well, first of all, you're in a question, Booker. This is not only the Indian attacks that I mentioned, but this was the focus of the Texas Troubles of 1860, when all those mysterious fires broke out all through North Texas, and people believed those were abolitionists and or slave agents who were carrying out their bidding. They thought John Brown's friends had come to visit them, and they didn't live far from Bleeding, Kansas, where violence like that had become rather commonplace. They had just watched the John Brown case in 1859. So in 1860, when these mysterious fires broke out, it really put them in a mood. And so you put fear of abolitionists, fear of Indian raids, and the rumors flew that the Peace Party was going to cooperate with Indians in attacking you. And generally, you're living in an atmosphere with no law enforcement. You've got outlaws and other people drifting through all the time stealing. You live with your rifle by your bed, and your main protection is you. And that may be you by yourself. It may be you as a militia, member of the local militia, which was mandatory. Or you might join up with a mounted volunteer company called Texas Rangers. But either way, you were the person who took care of your security. And so if somebody came and told you we have a danger amongst us, you knew what the reaction should be, and had been many times over.
Right. And this was a Unionist area. Had Cook County not voted against secession?
Yes. This is one of the 18 or so counties voted no to secession. 10 counties in North Texas voted against secession, mainly because they were populated by people from the Upper South, Tennesseans, Kentuckians, Missourians, a lot of those folks. So this area was just as divided over secession as all those states were.
All right, cool.
Well, we moved down here because this puts us right in the center of what was going on. This is the square that the hanging took place near in 1862, right near, ironically, this monument that will later be raised to the Confederacy. Where we're standing right now, if I point this way, you'll see a big modern courthouse. At that time, there was a log courthouse that had been kicked to pieces by a local fella's steer. So they actually met over on that side of the square at the top floor of a rented store, with the county judge swearing them all in. The vigilante court then would meet right over that side of the square. Now those buildings are not from the period. The buildings that they met in were burned in 1872, but these buildings that survived will give you some idea. Right behind me on this corner, this very modern building, this used to be the Dixon Hotel. One of the jury members was Thomas Barrett. He was a Church of Christ minister, and he made it his duty to sit on that porch right on that corner there and watch the hanging wagon take the victims down to the hanging tree 2 at a time.
Wow.
So it was one of the hardest things he ever had to do in his life. Now if we come around here, all of this side, picture 1- and 2-story wooden buildings, McCall's Saloon, different shops and stores. Over on the far corner, there's a modern furniture store. It stands on the place where the prisoners were actually held. There was a big log building there, and they held them in there, and they would take them out to the courtroom to be tried and then bring them back. And after they were hanged, another part of that building over there is where they stored the bodies.
Wow.
So you're right here, when you stand on the square in Gainesville, you are right in the center of what's going on. The court was right over there. The prisoners were held right over there. You can imagine the streets just teeming, militia and Confederate troops trying to keep some sort of order. And over that way, on that corner, the hanging wagon driven by Bob Scott, a local slave, come right down this road, hang a right, and head out across Pecan Creek to execute the men 2 at a time.
After showing me the scenes downtown where the trial had taken place in 1862, Dr. McCaslin and I drove about a mile to the east across what used to be known as Pecan Creek. Today it's been channelized by the city of Gainesville. And we went to the side of the Great Hanging. Now, if you look in the upper left-hand part of your screen there, you'll see a white pole with the bridge in the background. That's where the hanging tree had been. It was destroyed by lightning in the 1870s. But this is now the side of a park that the city of Gainesville inaugurated to commemorate the victims of the Great Hanging. And I'll let Dr. McCaslin pick it up from here. We're going to look at an older monument that was placed there in the 1960s and a monument that he had a large hand in placing.
Okay, I told you about the 1960s marker. This is it.
Oh, okay. That's that pink granite they like to make.
I was going to say, you see 2 problems with it right off the bat. Number 1, good luck reading it.
Right.
Number 2, if you do read it, authority of the people of Cook County, fear of rescue by Peace Party members brought troops and militia to Gainesville, where the prisoners were assembled. Hastened action by the Citizens Committee. Blah, blah, blah. It's very pro-Confederate.
Right.
And it's pretty much drawn 1964. It's drawn from the Diamond account, which had resurfaced and been published by the TSHA in 1961. That's part of why it leans so heavily to the Confederate perspective.
Right.
You want me to say that again?
No, I got it.
Okay. That's part of why it leans so heavily to the Confederate perspective, is that it relies very heavily on a recently published, for that time, 1961, account by George Washington Diamond, who was related to some of the people who did the hangings, not the people who were the victims. There was another account of the hangings by an eyewitness, Thomas Barrett, but at this point in time, there are only 3 original copies of that still survive. It was later republished by the TSHA, and now you can get both these accounts in one slim volume with an introduction written by yours truly.
All right.
Let's plug the products.
Absolutely.
Well, then I brought the book out, right?
So that you published your book in what, 92 or 93? 4, okay.
Book came out in 94. It was my dissertation. You write a book and you're just trying to get tenure. You're just trying to write the truth about something as best you can get to it, and I thought it was a good subject. Had no idea how that's going to resonate. Well, this piece of property belonged to Georgia Bass Davis, and when she passed, she decreed that this should be a park that commemorates the great hanging victims, mostly victims' perspective. But it was many years. There were several false starts. The city gave away a large chunk of it for the creek to be channelized, as you can see. They used it as a place to park their city vehicles, ignoring what her will said. Finally, through the hard work of local people, not me, they got organized and got something moving, and this is the result. We have this today. It's a long way from finished, but it's a good start. And what it has is on one panel, as close as we can get to an accurate, balanced account of what happened in that 2 weeks in October of 1862, and the names of all the victims of the hangings. Those who were hanged, shot while trying to escape, and then hanged in 2 different ways. You got a total of 41 names here. And it's much more readable than the 1964 monument.
Absolutely. You can actually see what's on it. Tell us a little bit about William C. Young, who chaired the Citizens Court. Now, he was a Confederate officer, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. William C. Young had come to this area very early. He was the wealthiest man in Cook County. He owned over 50 slaves, in part because he married a widow who had a lot of slaves too. He had a lot of political and public experience. He had been in the legislature. He had commanded a regiment during the Mexican War. He had been active in local defense units, even a U.S. Marshal at one point, I believe. When the war began, William C. Young was one of those who did not think secession was a good idea. But now that it had happened and the U.S. Army was leaving, he organized a regiment whose main purpose was to cross the river into what's now Oklahoma and occupy those forts and provide the people who lived in this area some defense from the Indians. Logical. Unfortunately for his designs, that unit, the 11th Texas Cavalry, CSA, was taken into Confederate service, and after the debacle at Shiloh, was transferred to Mississippi, whereupon about 2/3 of them came home to this area, including William C. Young, who claimed poor health and came home. So they were also some of those that were here trying to join state units, joining local militia, or just stay close to home because, they lived and they felt a bit of a pressure cooker. Indians on one side, abolitionists maybe under every rock, slaves that might rise up. There weren't a lot of slaves around here, but enough to give you pause. And of course, outlaws and other drifters coming through all the time. So William C. Young, when the rumors surface, Young will take charge. He will lead the meeting downtown. He will become the prosecutor for the Great Hanging until he is suddenly assassinated in the middle of the Great Hanging, which is when all hell broke loose. Then any kind of restraint, any pretense, I think, of law was shucked in the panic because you just assumed, okay, the bad guys are winning, right? We have to act now. And the victims, the people you can get your hands on, are these guys you are holding in the store downtown.
Tell me a little bit about the aftermath of this. These feelings, this bad blood between, the Unionists or the reluctant Confederates. Does that continue after the war?
Absolutely. It's very much there. through the 1870s, and there are certain families that are still very much, even today, very caught up in those feelings. I see there's a marker here for Buster Clark. He was the member of Nathaniel Clark's family. I believe he was a grandson of Nathaniel Clark, or maybe a great-grandson. I would have to check on that. But when I came up here to do my research, Buster was in his 80s, and I was told I needed to go talk to Buster about what happened. And when I went up to his yard, he had one of those little white fences around the yard with a gate, and Buster was sitting on the porch, and I said, "Mr. Clark, I'm Rick McCaslin. I'd like to talk to you about the Great Hanging." And he said, "Before I let you in the gate, you tell me one thing. Whose side you on?" And that was in the 1980s.
Right. Wow. There we go. All right. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Dr. Will's History Road Trip. If you like what I'm doing and want to continue following, please subscribe to my channel and click the notification button so you'll get updates when I post new content. Also, please consider supporting me via PayPal, Venmo, or CashApp. Your support will enable me to go to interesting places and film them and talk about them with you. Feel free to suggest locations that you might like to see me visit in the comments below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the road.